Thank you for joining the Vermont Historical Records program for the virtual office hours for July 2026. Today we will discuss Integrated Pest Management. The virtual office hours are generously funded by the National Historical Publications and Records Commission and the Vermont Secretary of State's office. Let's begin. Today's presentation will discuss pest and collections. What type of pests affect those collections? Integrated pest management. We'll define and talk about benefits. We'll talk about strategies that you can implement at your own organization and resources that are available to you. Not all pests are the same when it comes to our collections. Here we're going to talk about museum pests versus nuisance pests. Museum pests are insects and other vermin that can cause damage to our collection specifically. Oftentimes, the materials that we are preserving, they consider food. They may also nest in these collections and cause irreparable damage. Nuisance pests aren't necessarily damaging to our collections, but it might be an opportunistic animal seeking refuge. It may be a signifier of environmental issues on your site, or they can attract museum pests. For example, flies are considered a nuisance pest, and they don't directly harm our collections, but they can be a sign of a humid environment. And also the fly carcass can be a food source for museum pests. On this slide, I have a poster called The Dirty Dozen of Museum Pests. This signifies or shows 12 pests that are incredibly damaging and a high risk to our collections. Why are they risks to our collections? Because they see them as food, and they also see our environments as ideal places to set up shop. So collections and storage spaces can provide ideal environments for pests. First, we have the food source: paper, leather, textiles, glues, and other organic materials, aka what we want to preserve. And it can also be an ideal environment. We purposefully make areas that have low light, that are not accessed very frequently. And if the environment is not controlled, they can tend to be humid and warm. And these are all very attractive things to insects. So what can we do to prevent insects and other pests from inhabiting our spaces and causing damage to our collections? One option is integrated pest management. This is a program or a series of activities of detection, identification, and eradication of pests prior to becoming established and damaging our collections. Integrated pest management is a more targeted approach to dealing with pests. Instead of spraying to keep things out, it's using other tools. For example, sealing the outside of a building so pests can't opportunistically enter it. It minimizes the need for toxic chemicals by preventing pests, but also by having alternative treatments, freezing materials that have an insect infestation. Gamma radiation and heating are examples of this. It's also more cost-effective as a program that can fit a small budget or no budget. It's heavily invested in training and education as opposed to reactive things like treating for pests. The following is a list of integrated pest management activities that would be part of an IPM plan, and you can learn more about these from the NEDCC preservation leaflet that we will mention in the resources section. Addressing the building envelope is probably one of the most important because it's all about keeping things out. Buildings are one of the best protections for our collections. They provide a space where we can control the environment, where we can keep the items secure and keep things out that may damage them. So investigating your building and identifying areas that may be entrances for pests. For example, if your door and door jamb aren't perfectly aligned, that may be a place where insects could come in. Same with windows. There could be a gap in the siding of your building, which could be an ingress spot, or a hole that is in the wall that things can come through. So addressing that and trying to seal that building envelope is an important step. Environmental controls. Temperature and humidity can have a number of deleterious effects to our collections. In this instance with pests, a high temperature, high humidity can attract pests into your environment and also lead to mold bloom. Mold is considered a pest, just like insects. Mold spores are in the air everywhere around us, and when they settle on a space and have the food and water that they need, they can start to bloom. So the food source is the paper that we're trying to preserve. The water source would be the humidity in the air, which is absorbed by that paper and makes a perfect environment for that mold. We may not be able to invest in an expensive environmental control system, but we can monitor our environment. So keeping track of temperature and humidity, noting fluctuations in those two measurements can help us identify when we need a temporary tool like a dehumidifier or a humidifier, and can help us in the long run to keep that level environmental control that we seek. Another important part is training and educating volunteers and staff. Integrated pest management is a lot of logical steps, but it's important to share that information with the people that are taking care of your collections. So letting them know that food and drinks is not okay in the exhibit areas, in the collections areas. Many museums limit any food or drink to specific break rooms, and that's included for trash as well, keeping them in those break rooms where they are in a limited part of the building. Another is educating volunteer and staff, if they do see an insect on site, to collect it and bring it to the person in charge of that program so that they can make a decision on if that is a harmful pest to the collections. Another part of this is routine housekeeping. This is an activity that limits the amount of dust, which can abrade your collections. It can be a food source for pests, but it also has people in the building looking at those spaces and gives them the opportunity to identify any out of the ordinary situations. For instance, if you have a routine program in place where people are doing tasks on a weekly basis, for example, vacuuming the floors in the exhibit spaces, and quarterly dusting the furniture in the exhibit spaces, perhaps annually dusting in the storage areas. This gives the people doing this work an opportunity to notice any leaks in the ceiling or any pests that they see in the space. Further monitoring should take place. We were just talking about in the interior, which can easily fit into a housekeeping routine. but also of the exterior, looking for points of egress, and incoming materials. So incoming materials, oftentimes these can be, well, the problem is we don't know where they've been stored before. They could have been in somebody's basement or in an attic or in a place that had a pest infestation. So careful inspection of the materials and the containers that they come in can help identify a pest before it makes it into your storage area. If a pest is found, the materials and container can be isolated, and then you can just work to eradicate the pests in that container as opposed to collection-wide. One thing I have on here are sticky traps for insects. So this is a small, usually tent-shaped contraption. It's made out of cardstock. It has a sticky surface on the bottom, facing up, so that when insects walk across it, they are stuck to it. And these, I want to make sure to say, are not for small mice or other vermin. We don't recommend sticky traps to catch mice and rats and things. These are specifically for insects. And these would be placed by doors, by windows, at the entrance of your storage area, inside your storage area. So when insects are in the area and they walk over that, they're trapped. You can, on a routine basis, collect these traps, count and identify the insects that are there by location, and then identify whether they are a risk to your collections. I hope one key takeaway from this presentation is that knowledge is power. So much of integrated pest management is about knowing about your spaces, knowing what's happening in those spaces, and knowing the types of pests that could get in there. So knowledge is power. You come into your collections and there's a silverfish on the floor, and that's not a good feeling to find something like that in your collections. But what Integrated Pest Management emphasizes is taking the next step, learning about that pest, its life cycle, its food sources, signs of an infestation, and treatment and control. And this gives you tools to work with. So instead of just having a silverfish and not knowing what to do, and calling to get the space sprayed, you could take meaningful steps to help eradicate that pest from your spaces. Know your risks. We talked a lot about that, about monitoring. You want to identify all the places that these insects can come in. Look for food sources, which may not be a bag of chips or a sandwich like it is for us, but note that your collections are those food sources. How can you make a barrier between those pests and your collections? And ideal conditions for pests. Is your space humid? Is it dark? Is it irregularly accessed so that there's minimal disturbance to the space? We want to disturb those pests and make it so that the environment that we have for our collections is not welcoming to pests. And know your resources. In a couple of slides ago, we had a picture of the VHRP deep freeze. This is a piece of equipment which was purchased with NHPRC funds, and it is available to historical societies and other cultural heritage organizations. If you find that you have a collection item that has a pest infestation, that deep freeze is available, and it is a way to help eradicate or inactivate pests. For example, if there was a type of beetle on a textile, we can freeze, do a cycle of freezing and thawing the material to make sure to eradicate both the adult and larval stages of the insects. We've also used the deep freeze to make mold inactive if you have a water event where some of your collections have gotten wet and you do not have time to dry them, and you're concerned about a mold bloom, you can bring those materials to us. We can put them in the deep freeze until you can work on them. And there are plenty of online tools, including pest identification, and I do want to point out the picture on this screen. This is from the museumpest.net Pest ID fact sheet. So they have gathered information and pictures for dozens of pests, both museum and nuisance pests, and they give important information for you to educate yourselves on how these pests live and how you can get rid of them. So I have a couple of examples coming up from that. And also vendors. Even though we are using the integrated pest management so we can limit the use of toxic chemicals, it is still important, especially with if you do have a bad infestation, to make sure that you are contacting vendors that can help with that. And we'll see in the next example. All right, so this next two slides are examples from the Museum Pests ID fact sheets. And this first one is for bats, and I just wanted to point out the picture on the right is part of the fact sheet that shows identifying pictures, gives information about the geographic location, and the vulnerabilities and risks to our collections. On the left, I've placed two pieces of text from that fact sheet. The first are signs of infestation, so you can get some confirmation that that's what's going on, and control and treatment. And I'm pointing to this one specifically because the first bullet point says always work with a specialist when dealing with bats. And it gives the reasons. First, they may be protected species, and secondly, there are major human health and safety concerns related to bats. So you want to make sure that you have a professional. And that's a great thing about this fact sheet is it helps you to figure out those next steps, who to contact, and to help solve your problems. The second fact sheet is for the powder post beetle. So both of these are recent topics that both inspired and came in because of this presentation. The powder post beetle is a wood-boring insect, and I'll point to the fact sheet. We have some pictures of the adult and the larval stage, and also some of the damage that incurs from these insects. You'll notice that under the risk level it says high risk and act immediately. So this would be one of those dirty dozen museum pests that are high risk to your collections. So it does, again, I have the text for the sign of infestations and control and treatment, which can really help with those next steps. All right, well, to end the presentation, I do have some resources that I've compiled for everybody. I did want to point out the picture on the right. This is of a sticky trap that we mentioned before. The first resources are the museumpest.net website. Beyond the fact sheet, it also has educational information and FAQs regarding integrated pest management. This is actually the working group that develops a lot of this integrated pest management content. The Northeast Document Conservation Center also has a preservation leaflet, 3.10 Integrated Pest Management, and it's a great overview of what this would look like and the steps you would take to implement a plan. It also has some information on some of the museum pests that can most affect your collections. I also have two housekeeping guides from the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts and Minnesota Historical Society, respectively. And these have plans, and also they do have information for your volunteer, your staff, your boards to explain why implementing a routine housekeeping program is important for your collections. And lastly, from the National Park Service Conservagram series, they do have a new conservagram that came out in 2026 on monitoring insect pests with sticky traps. So again, this is a great, fairly short resource that talks about the benefits of this monitoring system and how to implement it at your organization. I just want to say thank you for everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next virtual office hours.